So my hope for the next COP29, my hope for the next Africa Climate Summit is that we are going to have honest conversation between parties. If we are talking about just transition, let us talk about these people here in Kenya who live in the rural societies and don't have, we can't say that they can do clean energy because they have to rely on firewood. They have to rely on, and they don't have the money to go into like electric cookers and so on. How do we finance that? How do we finance countries in Africa that don't have enough hydroelectric power or such, because they have to depend on something like coal, for example, South Africa? What do we do about that? We can't just tell them, shift today from coal into something else, and yet the money you're going to give them to shift is a loan. Hello, my name is Joseph Nguthiru from Nairobi, Kenya. I am the founder and the CEO of Hyapak and MC2, and I am a young Africa Climate Ambassador. I run two organizations. At Hyapak, we convert water hyacinth, the problematic aquatic weed, into biodegradable plastics. And at MC2, we are leveraging on AI as an early warning system for illegal logging, wildfires, and charcoal burning. What got me into the climate space, it's the out of passion and interest, because this is the thing, because if we do not take care of the planet, no one else will do it for us. We are the generation that the planet has been waiting for all along. So the Africa Youth Climate Assembly, or ACAP, was a 3-day pre-event for the Africa Climate Summit. There were so many goals that were meant for ACAP, but what was the most interesting bit was that it was the entry point, or the way that we could bring out the climate crisis to young people, getting them to understand what is happening and their role and how they can be part of it. I think the biggest role that ACAP was playing was to enable young people get together and give them a voice, give them a platform, and basically enlighten them on what's happening, because most of these negotiations happen behind closed room doors, boardrooms, and so on, and young people never get to have the chance to know what happens there. Yet they're the ones who get affected. So ACAP was like mostly a platform to get young people onto the summit. So COP is the conference of parties. Basically what happens is that it's a table that brings together the private sectors, government, other agencies, institutions, academia, and everyone else, just to discuss about climate change and what we could do and what each player is supposed to do about it. And what happens mostly there is it's the negotiation between countries. What are your NDCs, the national determined contributions? How much are you emitting? How much do you foresee yourself in terms of reducing your emissions? Are you pledging to give anything to the countries that are being affected by climate change, and so on? So in there also happen a lot of negotiations. Our stand as Africa is that we are being affected by climate change, as everyone knows, yet we are the ones who emit the least. And we are having so many efforts and so many initiatives that are going into mitigation. But rather we should be focusing on adaptation, because adaptation is where we are now being conditioned to how we are going to continue living with the crisis, the climate crisis. And the idea behind Africa Climate Summit at COP was that now that we know that we need more of adaptation financing, let's ask for what is rightfully ours. Let's ask the global north to own up to what they've historically emitted, and let's get justice for what we deserve. For young, one of the outcomes that came both from the Africa Climate Summit and the COP28 was the fact that we admitted the planet, as we admitted that oil was one of the biggest contributors of the climate crisis. But we also determined and we also agreed that we need climate financing. So a lot of pledges were made. And that's where the opportunity is for young people. Because with these pledges come new openings and new doors. For example, there was a lot of money that was set aside to go into agriculture. and smart agriculture and everything that's on that. So it's now for young people to tap into the agricultural sector and say, what can I do? Can I start a small fishery? Can I start a small, how can I do a smart farming and everything? There was a lot of money that went into energy, clean energy and everything. So it's now for the youth to think, what can we do about solar? What can we do about such other kinds of briquettes or anything else? So it's actually much more of, for young people, it's much more of a job creation resource than anything else. First of all is to get their voices heard. The Gen Zs particularly have proven to be so powerful in terms of the use of social media. And the biggest thing that young people can do right now is to hold governments accountable, to hold institutions accountable. If this government said they're going to do X, Y, Z, they're going to reduce their emissions, they pledged to give this amount of money, then young people can use their power and their voice to ask for accountability from these institutions, from these governments. They can even go to the extent that they themselves can be the ones who are sitting on the negotiations table. And they have to ask the tough questions because we are letting governments do it for us, and so far they're not being done as well as we expect as young people. So in addition to making the policies, then we can also tap into what is as a result of these climate negotiations. So as I mentioned, if it's agriculture, how can young people be more engaged in that? So in here, in Kenya, for example, we have a lot of attention going into carbon credits. It will be extremely wise for young people right now to invest their time and energy to learn how carbon credits work. And they themselves also to form the institutions that buy the carbon credits from other farmers. So when you have young people being engaged in terms of like agriculture, and they know what happens, and they know the whole value chain, the supply chains and everything else, then you can look for the loopholes that cause emissions. For example, transport is a really big emitter. If we have more young people going into the world of EVs, electronic vehicles and everything else, and if you have young people going into sustainable buildings, green buildings and so on, then you've created pockets for young people to get into different sectors and to be more engaged, and again to create employment for them. If I'm proposing to the government one solution, I think one of the biggest problems that we have currently with everything as it is set right now is that there is no single database that you can go to and see how much a country pledged, how much a country has given, and how that money has been spent, or how much of that will be allocated. So I think, first of all, we need to get our data right, because without data, then we can't make decisions. So for governments, I think it's to harmonize all this funding that's coming in, and don't take it as loans. So if my advice for the government would be, don't take it as loans, take it as grants for the African nation, so that we can develop ourselves without having to pay back the money. For the young people, I think, again, invest your time and energy to learn what is happening, because so much is happening, information is out there, but there's a bit of reluctance for young people to learn about this. The first best tool was AI. ChatGPT is a really good tool if well used. So organizations like One have these campaigns that they run, and the campaigns have really good descriptions and data sets of what is happening and how young people can get involved in all that. And so we have a lot of organizations doing a lot of things, and maybe AI is the way that you can use to know what is happening and where can I tap to from my local country. Have a look at the opportunities. For example, we've invested so much into electric vehicles, but the problem that electric vehicles are going to bring in the next 20 years is that these vehicles are extremely heavy. So the rubbers in the tires are going to wear down extremely fast. How can young people create a method of waste recycling or something of these tires? The batteries are going to be worn out soon. They are lithium based, so we currently don't have a technology behind that. how can young people take charge of that? We're having a lot of electronics that are happening with also the wind turbines, which are extremely heavy and not recyclable. How can young people take advantage of that? Because it's an opportunity, it's not a waste. What can we do about the microchips in Africa? So I think it presents so many opportunities that are untapped. We need to expand the agricultural sector in Africa. So much of our land is untapped. We don't have agriculture going on. And we need to rethink about how do we engage young people? How do we show agriculture as this beautiful thing so that we have them engaged? We have a lot of, as much as we have like this terrible news about climate, we have so much of good news. A lot of good things are happening. A lot of countries are really doing work. For example, Kenya, we are having like almost 99 or 98% of our energy coming from renewable energy. And unfortunately, these are not the stories that get highlighted with the press or the media. You're mostly going to see about what's happening in Australia using coal and everything else. So I think we should focus on the success stories, not just for young people, but also I think for everyone else, and also amplify them, because behind this, all this negativity, it's like a veil, and it hides every good stuff that's happening behind the scenes, and it's unfortunate. I think these conferences, wherever they happen, the COPs, the Africa Climate Summit, and all this, they're really good because they kind of motivate us to keep going. For example, with the recent COP28, one of my startups, Hyapak, won the best innovation and food, water, and it was really good. It was really exciting. And I think behind this also conferences, we have a lot of opportunities for young people to network, grow your connections, and the out of sight, out of mind. So if young people are not present in the room, the decision makers are not likely to think of young people when they're making these decisions. They're not likely to think of, because sorry to say, but these people are old, and their lifespan, it's not like they're not going to live for the next 20 or 30 years, but the young people are going to be there. So we want young people to be able to say what they want the world to look like in 2050 and 2060. And the only way they can do that is that if they're involved. And the only way you get involved is if you attend these things. So you have to, every chance that you get to attend this, attend. You get also opportunities to, if you have, for example, startups, to finance them. If you have some initiative that you're doing, get visibility, and that's a really good measure. So my hope for the next COP29, my hope for the next Africa Climate Summit is that you're going to have honest conversation between parties, real conversations, and not hidden between like big jargon and words. If we are talking about just transition, let us talk about these people here in Kenya who live in the rural societies and don't have, we can't say that they can do clean energy because they have to rely on firewood. They have to rely on, and they don't have the money to go into like electric cookers and so on. How do we finance that? How do we finance countries in Africa that don't have enough hydroelectric power or such, because they have to depend on something like coal, for example, South Africa? What do we do about that? We can't just tell them, shift today from coal into something else, and yet the money you're going to give them to shift is a loan, and they still have problems with their current grid as it is because it does not have enough energy to power the whole society. So I think we need to be honest about what is happening on the ground. We need to transition out of fossil fuels, yes, but what are the initiatives, what are the incentives? We've had problems here in Kenya because the last finance bill had the proposals of raising the tax on plastics, which is a really good thing from a climate perspective, but it does not occur well with the society because the average income of a Kenyan cannot afford to buy products at increased prices because they have additional tax on the plastics. So we need to be honest with what's happening in our societies and how do we have just transition, how do we finance that? Because I expect us to have this climate financing come to cut down the costs that will have been incurred on this taxation. So what I expect to see on this next summit is people being honest with each other.